So I want to introduce Megan. I always mess up your last name.
Minnock.
Minnock, thank you. She is from Michigan, and I was actually turned on to her because we have a mutual colleague, Rich Pirog, is it the Michigan Food Systems?
It's the Michigan State Center for Regional Food Systems.
Which is a great resource in Michigan. They do a lot of great national work. And so we are really fortunate to have Megan here to share her knowledge and experience with food policy and Food Policy Council. She's has a master's degree in planning. And I do want to apologize to you in front of everybody, so I have witnesses. She lives in Ann Arbor, Michigan. As you know, if you follow college football, Michigan and Michigan State has a big, it's a big Saturday up in the state of Michigan. College game days on campus at University of Michigan, right?
Yeah.
So it's a big deal.
It's in Ann Arbor.
So she has to miss the game. So I apologize. But you know, it's great. She's a consultant in Ann Arbor, and she also coordinates the state's network for local food policy councils in Michigan. So her experience and her resources that she's going to share with us today are going to be invaluable, and this is an opportunity for you to learn a great deal about food policy and food policy councils. So thank you, Megan.
Thanks, John. So I think I met everybody coming in, and I have a couple of activities designed as we go forward to get to know you a little better, and I might be asking you to do a little more work than some of the other presenters. But I hope you're okay with that. Are you okay with doing a little work?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So just a bit about me and what I do. I'm an urban planning consultant, and so most of my clients are municipalities. And starting in 2008, I got a call from a colleague of mine who was up in Flint, and she said, we're having a tough time here with urban agriculture and zoning. I knew nothing about urban agriculture. I know a ton about zoning. I love zoning. I'm a little odd that way. And so when we went through the project, we found that this was a new movement in Michigan that was going on and really around the country. And my colleagues who sit mostly at municipal desks and implement policy were not ready for it. Literally in the city of Flint, no one had put up a greenhouse, and somebody wanted to put it was a nonprofit group that was assisting African American youth who were learning about entrepreneurship through gardening. They got a grant to put up a hoop house, so a greenhouse, to do year-round growing, and it took them 2 years and about $16,000. And that was because of policy. 2 years for the approval and permitting, between getting approval at Planning Commission and actually getting building permits. And because the building official wasn't familiar with what the structure was, which any of you who've worked with a hoop house, you know it's just ribs and then plastic sheeting rolled over it. He made them get frost heaves, wind loads. They had to show where the storm water was going, but there really wasn't any storm water. And then also, really what we found out is technically it was illegal as well. So it was my job to kind of help to fix the legal structure. And we did a little bit of that, but what we also found was part of that food system that was broken in Flint because there is still no mainline grocery store in the city. And lots of people were growing to have their own food, but to sell it then was illegal. That also brought in other cultural issues as well, about what is a city, and especially a city that had so many people leave, and was literally half the size it was when Kennedy was president. So there's all these things in policy, and so that kind of started me on this path, and I've been on it ever since, with food being part of what I do as part of, we call it urban planning, but really my clients have been anywhere from rural townships to work in City of Flint and City of Detroit. So just so you know who I am, and one of the things I do now is I coordinate a network of local food councils across Michigan. And so every day I get to have emails and phone calls and meetings about what challenges people in Michigan have around local food and organizing within their community to change policy to create healthy, green, fair, and affordable food. But today, what we're going to talk about, and John, if you could advance the slide, is what exactly is food policy and what is a food policy council. And then as we go through, you'll see on the next slide, whenever you see a slide that has a big question mark on it, it's your time to do some work. So first, let's talk a little bit about food systems and the different things that come into policy. Other way, there we go. So I know that in your first program, I saw it on YouTube, you had something like this in terms of what is in your food system, the different sectors. There's agricultural production. The food then goes into distribution and aggregation. Aggregation is when they bring it together. It's processed, or manufactured. Sometimes yes, sometimes no. Sometimes you skip this step. It's prepared for consumers or for institutions. And then also, and this to me is a lot of times the piece that's missing, is resource and waste recovery and removal. And then that can flow into land access, stability, and soil back into production. And at the center of this these are the food system, and they work together as part of a system, as part of a community. But usually what our policy does is it puts them in these different silos and really looks at it like a chain of production. And then whatever comes off of it is not used. So from a sustainability perspective, if a lot of people say waste equals food. Well, when you look at it as a chain, you've got a lot of waste. So if we look at it from a holistic perspective and then have our policies look at it like that, then you get into a cycle. But there's also all these different systems that influence it, as you'll see on the next slide. Because these different systems influence what's going on. There's our political system. There's also our social and cultural system, and that goes into a lot of what you eat, what you choose to eat, what your family traditions are, what your food traditions are, what your culture is. There's an economic system that's at play, and one of the things in our food system in terms of this political system is that economic system, these big players, often who have the most money or the most skin in the game, they influence what this political system does to policy, and that affects what food we actually have. And there's also the natural and environmental systems, and they affect what you can grow and when and where and how you can use your food, how you can move it. Where I come from, often we'll have, especially in the Upper Peninsula, which I'll talk more about at the end, there'll be such snow events that people won't be able to get food for a day or two. Because trucks can't get across from Wisconsin because all the roads are closed due to snow. So all these different things affect our food system. And you could advance the slide. But what exactly is policy? It is the actions and the inactions by government that influence the supply. So how much we have, the quality, what it's like, the price, the production, the distribution and consumption of food. And on this quality, also I'll add that quality could be further cut by, is it culturally appropriate? And is it accessible? And do people know how to cook it and consume it? So next slide. All right. So I want to get to know a little bit about you, but you're going to have to get up out of your chair. So this is a really brief introduction to food policy. We're going to do a deeper dive, but I want to know what you know. So we're going to vote with your feet. So is anybody shy about being on camera? I'm taking silence as agreement. Okay, I'll stand in front of you. All right, so on this end, if you know all about food policy, you love food policy, you live this, you could be up here teaching. I want you to stand here. All right, then we're going to go on a spectrum. So if you kind of know about some things, or you know one thing about food policy well, you kind of feel like 50% that this is your thing, or I have a body of knowledge, but I could share a little bit, I want you to stand here. All the way over here, I know nothing. And I hate you for making me stand up and say it. Okay? So, up and find your place.
What if we don't hate that you made us stand up?
Well, this is. Yeah, no, you have to.
Where's the 50%?
50% is right in front of the screen. So this is like vast knowledge.
75.
75? Okay.
John's laughing.
Anne is 75.
Yeah.
Notice how John has abstained.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I'm going to ask just a couple of questions to get to know. So Anne, what's the 25% that you want to know?
I want to know how to affect the changes more. I mean, I really need to know. I mean, I understand how policy works and I understand the drivers and all that stuff. I need to know literally what my two hands can do to fix what's broke.
Okay. So anybody in here, what's the thing that you feel strong about in food policy or that you know that you could share? All right. Kinsey?
Most of my experience with food policy is whenever it's been implemented but not enacted. So it's an act as opposed to a policy. And how I would be really interested in learning the next steps of making sure that the funding is there, that the city council, that the state is aware of it and pushing it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And somebody from the spectrum, what's the one thing about food policy you really want to know? Or several?
What is illegal to sell with the farmer's market that I'm with so far as I've gotten all kind of things about the eggs, about the live plants, flowers, what are the rules for selling those, what we can sell and what we can't
At the farmer's
at
market.
the market.
Okay.
That's it.
All right.
So, and I've worked on policy issues on other issues like underage drinking, traffic safety,
Uh-huh.
and help push policy through. And kind of the same thing. It's on the books, but it's not enforced, it's not enacted. But I'm a total newbie, virgin, if you will, to the food policy realm. I didn't think that was something that we could, as commoners, could help enact and do, because I've never thought of food as having policies involving food as far as those kind of things.
Mhm.
So I'm more interested to learn what there is that we can do.
I got a question for you.
Sure.
Is food policy like we're gonna pass laws that has to be obeyed? Or is this legislative work, or is it just some local rules that
You
obey?
just set up my next slide.
Oh, sorry.
It's okay. So before we move on, does anybody else have anything to share in terms of what you want to know about food policy? Marianne, you're looking
I'd like
at.
to know a little bit about, on a more rural and smaller scale, what we're able to do on a small scale for small towns to change food policy versus I'm more familiar with it like at a big city level. But I live in a very small part of Louisiana now, and I'm interested to see how that's different.
Okay. Yeah. All right. So take a seat. Thank you. Okay. So to answer the question about what we're talking about for food policy, let's talk about what public policy is. So to begin with, public policy is laws, and those are enacted. And those can be enacted at the federal, the state, the parish, and the local level. So federal, state, local. There's also judicial decisions. So with every one of those laws, a lot of times somebody takes it to court, the courts make a decision, and then that changes things. For instance, where I am from, I'm from Michigan. We have a Michigan Right to Farm Act. It was enacted in 1983. There have been at least 16 state Supreme Court cases since then about the Right to Farm Act that have and some of them have fundamentally changed whether local zoning, so local laws about land use, apply. And so that has had a huge impact on our food system in Michigan and what you can do, where and when, and what can be regulated. There's also organizational guidelines, so how organizations do things, and that can be your parish health department and how they regulate farmers markets. That can be your state Department of Agriculture and how they administrate grants and how they decide to dole out money. There are also things between agencies and how they decide what they do and where they do it. And so, for instance, a lot of times I know people who run farmers markets in Michigan who have the County Department of Health saying they have jurisdiction over food tastings that they have, but really it's underneath the State Department of Agriculture, who has regulation over the farmers market, and they're getting confusing information from both departments, because one's saying you can do it and the other says you have to have this license. And really what needs to happen is they need to talk to each other, and then we make a decision. And that did happen. It was because people advocated and then went to the state government and said, we need clarity. Also, there are social norms. So how we enact business and how we do things, and that's very cultural, that can affect, and that is policy. It's how we act. And culture can be changed, and also culture is often is valued, and it's integral to what your region is and what your heritage is. So if you can advance, so how does this go into food? Because usually in our life in the United States, food is you can access it. It's not something that is in short supply. So there's the U.S. Farm Bill, and the U.S. Farm Bill is if anybody here is a grower or producer, knows something probably about it, and it affects your life in some way, whether it's subsidies, what you can grow, etc. There's the Child Nutrition Act. So does anybody here deal with school lunches, free breakfasts at schools, and also other feeding programs? So that Child Nutrition Act, that's at the federal level. That right now is on a continuing resolution to be funded, but it's on its 5-year cycle, and there could be changes in terms of the amount of dollars per meal that's available. There's the Food Safety Modernization Act. Again, this is at the federal level. The act was passed. Right now it has gone through the USDA. They've made changes in terms of how food safety will be administered on farm and throughout the food chain. And then so they've made the rules, and now they're going to enact the rules, and then the rules, they're going to start with the big producers, and then one of them ways down to the little producers. So I was sharing with some people before we started, there's a lot of growers in Michigan that this is making them very nervous. Because they feel like they won't be able to meet these new standards because they're designed for really, really big farms, and they are medium to small scale farms. There's SNAP and WIC, and those are the programs that are for food stamps. SNAP is food stamps or EBT. WIC is women, infants, and children. Those are taken from the federal level, again, kind of through these different acts, but then come down to the state level, and each state decides how they're going to dole out those dollars. One of the things that in Michigan, again, with policy and WIC, is it's actually harder to get a alcohol selling license than it's harder to get a WIC license in a county where all the WIC licenses are sold, have been already distributed, than it is to get a license to sell alcohol. And it's just the way it's been administered. So that's one of the things that people are working to change. Institutional purchasing. Now that may sound like, well, that's a decision that somebody makes, but every one of your governments, and including your school districts, make a decision about how they purchase their food and where they purchase their food from. And plenty of local governments or school districts have said, we're going to have 10% of our food purchased from local producers. And that can change the food system, because then those growers know, or those processors know, that they have a market and it's worthwhile for them to change their behavior. Zoning, which I mentioned, is one of my loves, but that is about land use and where different things can go and what the buildings can look like, what the roads are, and what things you need to make sure that everybody's being a good neighbor and everybody is we're protecting health, safety, and welfare. There's also farm to school, which is institutional buying, but it's also got an educational piece in that you have kids either growing, maybe in edible gardens. You have also local food, and farmers come to schools and share their product and do tastings and introduce kids to different types of cabbage or carrots or things that they may not have seen before. And one of the things that's been proven through research is that the more kids get to know healthy food as kids, the more likely they are to buy it, eat it, consume it as adults. There's also business incentives. So every single one of your local governments or your parishes, and definitely at your regional level, you've got your economic development folks right here, they give incentives to businesses to do certain things. They may give tax breaks. Also at the federal level, there are grants. There are state programs available too. One of the things that was done in Michigan to help boost our local food system was grants were given out there was a grant program for 3 years to help local food infrastructure, and it funded a number of food hubs, which are places that aggregate food and then distribute it. And they all had a value that their food was local, and mostly local was made in Michigan, because you can define local a lot of different ways. I'm sure some of you have had that argument with people about what is local. But that was a way that there was a business incentive at the state level to help change the food system. So now I am going to give out to all of you sticky notes. So Brainstorm, there is no wrong answer. Write down what you think are some actions that the government does that influence the food system.
Are you familiar with that 2006 Bioterrorism Food Act that requires registration of people who are in the food business and distribution? You have to register actually with the government.
Yeah, and that would be one. So that would be an example.
Right.
Things they actually do or things they could do?
Things they actually do. My next question is about inactions. So these are actions. So I want an action, I want a policy, I want something that's done, a policy, a program, not what they could do, what they're doing right now. No wrong answer, and then no one has to know whether it was you or not unless they recognize your handwriting. One idea per sticky note. Forgot to say that.
But more than one sticky note.
As many sticky notes as you want, but one idea per sticky note.
My husband's from Michigan.
Oh, yeah.
He's up Traverse City, Cadillac.
Yeah.
And his parents are in Sparta.
Mhm.
So I'm very familiar with the Michigan, like the farming and zoning and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to hear you talk about it. I'm like, oh, I know about that.
Nice.
That's why I yelled at you, go blue.
Yeah. Go blue. We've been happy this football season. Hasn't been that way in Ann Arbor in a while.
Are you rooting for the Spartans?
No. Yeah. Although I will say Michigan State does a fabulous amount in food system work in Michigan. I have a master's in urban planning from U of M, so
Cool.
I have to say, go blue.
Very cool.
That's why I couldn't understand when they had that trouble with the cantaloupe a few years ago from Colorado.
Mhm.
Why they couldn't immediately track them. If
Right.
These people are supposed to be telling where their distribution is at,
Yeah.
and they couldn't. Those people went to jail, you know that.
Yes, I do. Okay. Tax benefits, taxes, labeling. Okay. Wow. Excellent. All right. Now, while I organize these, next thing is to brainstorm inactions.
See, you said one, didn't you?
What? One per sheet.
Oh.
You can have as many as you'd like.
There you go.
All right. not doing. It's currently not doing. So,
Wait a minute, you said what they were doing or not doing?
Could even just be, I'm looking this direction and something's happening over here, but I'm
Right.
purposely looking over here.
so an example of an inaction might be that your county does not have an institutional does not have a local purchasing program where they say 10% of the food that we buy just for any event that we have is going to be local. So, or they don't have a farm to table program, or they don't have a food to, they don't have an edible garden. Allow importation of foreign food. That's an action that they. Okay. Yes. That's the action, right? Yeah. Okay. All right, and can I ask one of you to volunteer and bring up the inactions to me? Okay. Harvest of the month. That's that's farm to school, right? Harvest of the month.
I'm not going to organize these for you, just stick them there.
Okay, great.
Oh, that's a good one.
It's too low. All right. So you've got them all?
Yes, ma'am.
You can help me organize them if you want. How do you want? I'm just trying to group them by a kind of category, like big to small. So there's incentives. Okay. Might move it over here so it's kind of near this because this was a lot about incentives. Requiring labels,
Permits.
Smaller organization.
Support. Urban action, beekeeping, local food.
Okay. Funding like that. Put that big journal.
That one right there. Constitute vegetables, school lunch, or farm to school.
I kind of had some farm to school stuff over here, harvest of the month. So let's put those kind of close together. Oh, ketchup, yeah.
Parish purchasing. City or parish supported gardens. That could be a local food right here. Process to get local food from local farmers. Infrastructure, I saw where that was somewhere.
Sweet loan forgiveness, focus, small
Infrastructure.
infrastructure.
Yep.
Okay. All right, so what I've done is I've taken each idea and we tried to group it into different categories, and some that you identified were big and broad under action. Like these are the things that government does every day. Elections, funding, enforcement, and policy. And all those can funnel down and have an effect on the food system. And also in terms of that, and up there is that government passes laws and regulations. A couple of people mentioned taxes in general, but also tax benefits for businesses that support buying local producers, i.e. grocery stores and restaurants. There was kind of a lot around how government deals with food safety and with the actions that they do, that they inspect products, inspects processing facilities, requires the registration of food processes and distribution, and the labeling and the packaging. But also in that, it's also how government comes in and does, and also in the name of food safety does certain things like prohibit raw dairy, regulate antibiotics, and defining organic food. There were a whole bunch about also government provides grants and subsidies, and specifically 3 or 4 around incentivizing farm subsidies or corporate farms. Also looking at public funds for food entrepreneurs and providing educational information materials. And somebody here said, one of the things that they do is there's a lower property tax classification for ag production. There were a couple of one-offs by accepting SNAP at a gas station that doesn't, with no fresh food. Changing zoning regulations to encourage communities to farm and grow. And then stores that farmers need to have and process their insurance. Stores need farmers to have their insurance to sell their produce. And that goes back to farm safety, kind of because then who's responsible in the end if somebody gets sick? And that's one of the things about food is that, if somebody gets sick, we need to be able, especially when we aggregate it from a lot of different places, we need to be able to figure that out so more people don't get sick. Also, in terms of inaction, there was people identified a lack of funding, no parish purchasing or no incentives for locally produced foods, and they don't permit any ag on unused state-owned land and empty lots. So there are things that government can do to help. No city or parish-supported community gardens. There's also building this local food infrastructure, like ordinances, support ordinances against keeping urban chickens or beekeeping, government not doing enough to produce or support local food production, no program to access canned food made by local people. There were also inactions in terms of lack of the district mandate to purchase and lack of government-supported infrastructure for local food distribution. We don't have a process to get food from local farms. Also, there was a lot about kind of focusing on smaller operations and student loan forgiveness for young farmers, and not taking advantage of programs that are funded, good food projects, school gardens, just because it takes work. And sometimes that is an issue with government, is that they don't have the time, the bandwidth, the capacity, or the political will. Not a clear definition of enforcing what constitutes a vegetable in school lunches, i.e. is ketchup a vegetable? And not requiring labels on cottage food produced food. So there's a lot of different things there. So can you see, even just within this room, in a quick brainstorm, how big this field of food policy is? And also kind of what everybody's interested in or what comes into their world. All right, so if you can move the next slide. So a lot of times we think that government works like this. This is this pyramid. We have the law, and then it comes down and it's funded, and more people are involved in that funding and those decisions, and then it's administrated, and then we're done. And that's just is what it is. But really, policy, especially at the federal level, with things that are cyclical, like the Farm Bill, like the Care and Nutrition Act. And there are many of these also at state level that the law occurs. It is funded or not funded. and how it is funded actually affects how this law happens. Then it is administrated, and again, those decisions as they trickle down through those layers of government, it may not be your elected official who is doing the administrating. They may be 6 or 7 layers away from that legislator who you do have direct influence over. And then also that, especially grant programs, their effectiveness is measured. And so that directly influences then what happens to that law again. Because any law can be changed. So it's not, we live in a democracy, these things can be changed. It takes a lot of time. A lot of time and a lot of patience. If you are interested in policy work, you need to have patience. It moves slowly. If you could advance it. Also, we have this, again, kind of classic civics lesson with the US Constitution. The federal government has certain powers, and they have those, and they may administrate those down to the state or the parish or the local level. But also the state, the local, and the parish level all are enabled to do things on their own, specifically with health, safety, and welfare, that the federal government is not allowed to be within the sphere of, but sometimes they do. But in reality, it's not this monolith. If you can advance the next slide. Sometimes it's that the federal government is over here on its own and it makes decisions and administrates them, like with the US Farm Bill. Or they may have some of the state or the local level or the county, but these all have their own regulations that are dealing with what goes on in terms of agricultural production. And these all directly affect each other, and the federal government's out here and it affects everybody, but they're kind of out on their own. And the next one, a lot of times you'll have the federal and the state working really closely together, because what happens is the federal government decides that there's a program, like usually the nutrition or the SNAP and the WIC, and what they do is they say, we don't want to manage this whole thing. We're going to give it to the states and they'll administrate it. And so then how they go through those dollars. And then the local and the parish, they're just basically affected by it, but they don't have any real political power to change anything there. So, and then sometimes at the local and the parish, they have all the power about it. And that's a lot of times with land use and zoning. And where the federal and the state come in is again with that case law, or maybe something comes up and they decide, okay, we are going to step in and create a rule here because you local municipalities gone too far. So what this all means though is if you're interested in policy, you need to know all these different layers, and for that specific policy, who enacts it, who funds it, who administrates it, and who measures it. So again, so it can get it can get complicated.
So one of the reasons I got involved with the Food Policy Council here is because it started with a simple question. I have a lot of eggs. I sell them at the farmer's market. I wanted to sell them to local restaurants. Couldn't do that because I didn't have a license that was self-administered, but nobody in the state was able to administer my license. That was literally what I was told.
Mm-hmm.
So I spent, I don't know how long, with the USDA, with Baton Rouge, with trying to figure this out, and I still haven't got an answer 2 years later.
Mm-hmm.
I'm still ticked off because I can't sell my eggs.
Right.
Louisiana don't regulate egg production.
Sorry?
They don't regulate home egg production.
But if I want to sell it to restaurants, I have to be certified, and I have to have a tracking mechanism for them and a way to sell it to them.
That?
Health Department
Right.
and USDA.
The USDA don't have anything to do if you're selling local, I can tell you that.
They
Within
do.
the state of Louisiana.
Yeah.
No, USDA don't have nothing to do with it. I'll beg you differently on that one.
So what happens a lot of times is that there are these unclear places
Right.
where those details of, you said that the state legislature or the USDA said you should have a permit, they told the states you should have a permit, and then it's just gotten missed. But what that happens is a direct influence on your business and also on the ability to grow a local food system because you can't scale up. and then have eggs that go into restaurants instead of somebody buying from a big supplier like Cisco or whatnot. So then it takes patience, and it also takes a lot of times being connected at the right level where somebody can do something. So in one of the instances in Michigan was that there is a sitting committee that's enabled by the governor that's specifically about food. And people talk about things exactly like this, but you have the head of the Department of Agriculture sitting at that table. So then they go off, find somebody and say, you are going to fix this. And so, but that is part of relationship building and networking, which is essential in order to have policy change. Because when you are that lone person out in the woods trying to navigate it, it's entirely frustrating. And so those networks, through things like food policy councils, help to create those channels and those relationships.